The following podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed therein are solely those of the speakers. Additionally, this podcast may include swearing, discussions of sexual content and assault, as well as discussions of racism, antisemitism, sexism, and violence. Listener discretion is advised. And now, finally, the release of our very first episode of the La Belle Et La Bete double feature. The youngest girl, however, displayed greater perseverance and firmness in their common misfortune. She bore her lot cheerfully, with a strength of mind much beyond her years. Not but what, at first, she was truly melancholy, alas. Who would not have felt such misfortunes? But after deploring her father's ruin, she could do better than resume her former gaiety, make up her mind to the position she was placed in, and forget a world which she and her family had found so ungrateful, and the friendship of which she was so fully persuaded was not to be relied upon in the time of adversity. Every intelligent person who saw her in her true light was eager to give her the preference over her sisters. In the midst of her greatest splendor, although distinguished by her merit, she was so handsome that she was called the Beauty. Welcome to Niche Retelling, the podcast where we explore all the ways old tales are made new. I am your host, Jasmine Garcia, and joining me today are...
Je suis Sam Marchioni, je ne suis pas une fairy.
Soy Bryan.
Just River will work. I'm Ilana.
En ik ben Kyle Kallgren. Goedemorgen. Yes, so happy to be on, and I'm very happy to be talking about La Belle Et La Bete again. I love this movie. I have so many thoughts still.
Yes, we are going to be talking about the 1946 Jean Cocteau classic, La Belle Et La Bete, and much like Kyle, I am also very excited about this, actually. And considering some of the pre-recording discussions we've had, this is going to be very interesting. As always, we must start. What is everyone's connection to the story of Beauty and the Beast? I mean...
Show of hands, how many people did... Well, it's a podcast, but I'm going to guess pretty much all of us at least saw the Disney version at least once.
Oh, many times.
Oh,
on repeat on the VHS all the time.
Hold on. River, that was a maybe noise.
That is a maybe. So, really, as I explained in the Little Mermaid episode, is there are a lot of Disney movies where I have never seen them all the way through, but I know their soundtracks forwards, backwards, and sideways. And because my parents are Disney adults with a lowercase a, I have been to the parks so many times that all of the Disney movies have culturally osmosized into my bones. Because the mouse hegemony will come for us all. So I don't know if I have purposefully sat down and watched the Disney movie all the way through, as it were, on purpose. Have I sat through enough segments of it and listened to enough musical numbers that I have sewn together the plot mostly? Yes.
It's valid.
Yeah, no.
Just to be clear, we're talking about the 1991 version, right?
Yes.
Yes, the animated one.
I hate that we have to clarify that, but...
That's what it is.
Yes, but that is not for today. I would like to add just that I am someone through my various weird experiences with what college I took and other things that I do, that I wouldn't say I study fairy tales, but I collect them. Certainly Jazz and Sam are raising their hands with that one, which shocks me not at all. And so, while probably my first exposure to the Beauty and the Beast type story would have been the Disney animated, just because of how old I was and whatever, I've got a lot of different versions of the Beauty and the Bestial Groom in my head. And so it was really interesting watching this film, going like, well, this is a thing that comes from here, and this kind of comes from here, and then these things are like where the different fairy tales kind of overlap, which is something I definitely want to talk about more later.
Oh, yes,
but it's very interesting looking at this very clearly not influenced by the Disney film, because the Disney film would not come out for like 50 years almost. And so like the things that are similar and the things that are different are really interesting. And then you take it back a step and compare it to the first versions of the story that were written down, and then it's like, well, that's new.
Are you talking about the Gabrielle Cézanne-Barbeau de Villeneuve part where, like, it's revealed Belle actually is a fairy princess who was destined to marry the Beast the whole time?
I actually meant the Pavilion of Diana thing. It's got a very Cinderella beginning to it, which is not uncommon, and is basically how the original written versions of the fairy tale. And for those of you who are not fairy tale nerds, the reason I'm saying original written down version is because all of these fairy tales and folklore and stuff like that were oral traditions, sometimes a very, very long time before someone actually wrote them down. And so we have the version that was written down, which is kind of a snapshot in the history of this. Also applies to mythology as well, by the way, mythology and liturgical whatever.
Pretty much most of the content of this podcast is going to come from the oral tradition in one way or another.
Exactly. And so sometimes we know that there are like variant versions of a story, and like not applicable to Beauty and the Beast particularly, but the Grimm brothers were very good about recording alternate variants. And some of the other folks that looked at folk stories as anthropologically as opposed to as literature, like, you know, when Pernod wrote down Cinderella, and then there are the ones that people don't realize actually were made up from whole cloth, like The Little Mermaid, which comes from some folklore traditions about mermaids, but like the specific story that Anderson wrote down, I'm sure y'all talked about this, and the subtext of the story was that was what he wanted to tell. And then when you get to like retellings like this film, you're seeing the things that Cocteau found interesting, stole from other places, like the Pavilion of Diana or whatever that was called, is very Bluebeard. The way that she's like trusted with the key. I'm jumping ahead. But that was really interesting as like a fairy tale head to be like, oh, interesting.
It's a really good like rum punch where you got like a splash of this, a splash of that. You know, we're gonna dump a little bit wholesale in here. We're gonna shake it all up, and if it doesn't make sense by the end of the night, that's okay.
I mean,
hence the opening scroll.
Yeah, well, bear with us.
Scroll with
bear with
handwriting
us.
I despair of.
Yeah,
Jean
it was
Cocteau,
frustrating.
go back to learning cursive properly. Listeners, for context, the reason why I bitch so much about the cursive is because I have been learning French on Duolingo for 875 days as of our recording for this, and I decided that I was going to translate Jean Cocteau's Think Like a Child preamble in my own word. And I did okay, but it was very hard to transcribe the French down so I could read it.
Oh, Sam. Well, as I said, this is a very in-character thing for you to do. I wasn't obsessed with the Disney movie at all as a child. It's not like I super identified with and quite possibly built a good chunk of my personality off of Belle as a child. No,
of course not.
In one of my other videos, I posited this theory that people have 3 animated characters they will identify with in their childhood. One they look like, one they act like, and one they want to be. Now, mine were, I looked like Odette from The Swan Princess, I acted like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and I really wanted to be Megara from Hercules.
Good choices.
If you know me, you understand me on a much more fundamental level now. But yeah, Belle resonated with a lot of us, and so I think that's probably one of the bigger hurdles for modern adaptations and for past adaptations now, because unfortunately Disney Belle is now kind of established as the archetypal Belle.
Yeah.
Disney's very good at colonizing our subconscious.
Yes.
Basically.
That
If
is
you really
literally
want
what
to
they
get
do
me
for a
started,
living.
if you really want to get me started on Once Upon a Time's version of Belle.
Save it for the mini. Save it for the mini.
No.
Save it for the megasode.
That's gonna be a sexy sode.
Save it for the megasode.
Yes, but thank you for adding further promo content. I have it under sinister music. It's gonna be great.
Every time Once Upon a Time gets mentioned, the episode grows closer.
And you take a shot.
We say once upon a time and the horses start whinnying like we just said Frau Blücher.
Oh, God.
Go, go, go.
Now, that is a delightfully dated reference. I approve.
I don't care. I love it. And that is also something we
I didn't say dated was bad. Maybe anachronistic would have been better.
I did actually. I think I had, growing up in childhood, in addition to the Disney movie, I remember my family had this like tiny little box set of fairy tales in pastel colors, and there was a Beauty and the Beast one. I remember the Beast looked more like a warthog than anything else.
I think the Jan Brett version, right?
Maybe. I don't know. We have long since gotten rid of those little books, but I remember them.
Yeah, because let me see if I will send you a picture of the illustration, because I was going to bring that up, because that's another one that I grew up on. It was in one of my school classrooms. You know, we actually talked about Jan Brett's illustration style a lot, because she was just so prolific with children's books.
Nope, that one's not it. I do think I remember reading that one, but that's not the one that I had as a child. I remember because the beauty in that version was brunette, but...
I mean, this is one of those stories that gets retold almost as much as we said in the Cinderella episode. Like, actually, interestingly enough, in, like, one of the big DVD releases of the Disney version of Beauty and the Beast, there was a special feature where they would talk about the history of the stories of some of their most famous movies. So they would just talk about the history of Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella. Editor Jasmine here. Thanks to Sam's help, as well as the Disney Archives YouTube channel, I was able to find this special feature. It's called The Story Behind the Story, and Celine Dion hosted it. But I'll put a link in the show notes. It is very old-fashioned, almost to the point where I'll admit, when I was first trying to find this on YouTube, I didn't realize it was the actual one, because just the lettering, it looked like something out of Windows Movie Maker, if you guys remember that. But no, give it a watch. It's very quaint, and it is kind of this podcast's origin story. I think that did kind of help unlock the nerd that I am, who is doing this podcast in the first place. Basically, ever since I was in middle school, I kind of sought out new versions of my favorite fairy tales, because, you know, I grew up in the generation that was most affected by Ella Enchanted. I feel like this is just one of those stories that finds patterns in so many stories, even ones that may not be even consciously trying to be Beauty and the Beast. Like, we are kind of in a golden age of monster fuckers. I don't know if y'all noticed.
I will say,
I was waiting to see how long it took till we brought up monster fucking.
I mean, it had to happen at some point, because in this film, she actually says she's disappointed by his appearance when he's human again. Which, by the way, was there some kind of, like, deeper symbolism to casting the same actor that played the Beast and the Jackass?
Yeah, the deeper symbolism was Jean Marais was the director's lover.
That too.
See, what I wanted to do was I wanted to go on a deep dive and was like, does Jean Cocteau have some beef with Bertolt Brecht I don't know about? Was this like some kind of middle finger to Verfremdungseffekt double casting? Because the explanation that the prince gives in the movie, they spend like a good 2 minutes interrogating why the prince looks like Avenant, and it's not a good explanation to me.
They honestly would have been better if they just
like
kind of left it
rhymes.
alone.
How dare you? How dare you wield my...
Yep, they weren't. I cannot tell you how much I squeed when I first found that out, by the way.
As you mentioned, the character that Jean Marais plays, Avenant, was not in any of the versions before Beauty and the Beast, before this version of Beauty and the Beast.
But he eventually turns into Gaston.
He does. Basically, Cocteau got rid of several of Belle's brothers and built a human lover that would essentially serve as a foil for the Beast. possibly to give Jean Marais more screen time as his actual self.
Yeah, you
I don't know,
must feel
possibly,
bad for Jean Marais
and
and all
possibly,
that fur.
but he's so expressive in it. He's so like charming and like soulful, and
If you can have both.
there's that famous anecdote of Greta Garbo like crying out, "Oh, give me back my beast!" once the beast turns back into Prince Charming, because he is that charming. But I think just having the double casting serves to, reinforce those themes of inner beauty versus outer beauty that would later be exploited and mass marketed by the Disney version with the character of Gaston, who is set up as a foil to the beast. They have a fight at the end of the film.
yeah, very
Yeah.
directly.
And
Yeah.
honestly, it's not exact, but when you look at his design versus Jean Marais, you can definitely kind of see where the connection is there. Like, there are certain looks on his face while he is at Avenant where I'm just like, they definitely were
You know
looking
what
at
it
this.
reminds me of? If we're not looking at it from a metatextual perspective, but we're looking at it as internal. The fact that traditionally the person who plays Captain Hook in Peter Pan and Wendy should also be playing Mr. Darling, and which Disney, I believe, the same
They
voice
did it
actor,
in the
but
animated version.
in the animated
Conread, I believe it
I
was.
I don't
Or was that
want to
Disney?
deal with Disney and Peter Pan anymore.
The
but,
Jason Isaacs version you're thinking of, yes, he played the dad and he played Captain Hook. Sexiest Captain Hook.
Easily.
They did that when I
Well-
was in Peter Pan, but we'll get to that.
But yeah, definitely just like thematically, if the actual lesson of the story is that men don't change, don't expect them to, like, there you are. Because I'm sure at some
But
point
he
we
does!
will
He does
get
change! Physically!
Changes
Yes,
more
but
than he
that
does
doesn't-
the 2014 version.
Don't get me started. Don't.
We need to save it. We
I'm
need to
sorry,
save
We
it.
gotta keep
I'm
that
sorry,
one
I
for
had
next
to.
time. Spoilers. But with Beauty and the Beast, people always argue about, the Stockholm Syndrome thing. And I'm gonna, yeah, exactly. So we'll start by pointing out that Stockholm Syndrome isn't real.
It was an excuse made up by the cops for fucking up.
And also to explain female emotions in a way that made insecure men more comfortable. Nope.
Tous les gendarmes sont bâtards.
But if the idea is like, oh my gosh, she falls in love with her captor and that's bad. I mean, varying different versions of the stories do put more or less effort into the two of them actually trying to get to know each other. This one, I swear to God, there were like scenes missing, it felt like. Because they're like hopping forward through the plot, and I'm like, wait, where'd the middle go? But
If you think this was bad, the
oh,
Twilight.
good!
So,
I'm excited.
I'll save it for I will briefly plug one of my very old videos. I don't like watching it because I'm embarrassed of myself 5 years ago. But I did bring this up. It's also worth remembering that the original version is more about like a parable for girls preparing for arranged marriages to older men.
Yes.
Jean-Marie
It's
Le
like-
Prince de
and-
Beaumont.
Yeah, Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont and Gabrielle Suzanne Babot de Villeneuve. Both of them are basically creating these morality parables for young girls. Like, hey, yeah, your husband is probably old enough to be your father and hairy and gross, but, maybe he's really kind underneath and you should give him a chance and be happy as his devoted wife.
So that's hilarious because I did not actually know that, but that's always how I've looked at the Disney version and the way I looked at this one, especially because it really felt like the marry me part was almost like it's highly significant to the film, but to their relationship it's almost incidental. But like the sudden switch from like we're best friends, oh no I love you, feels like something straight out of a fanfic, and I say that with love.
I mean, Beauty and the Beast AUs are some of the most popular fairy tale AUs.
Oh my god.
And, I will say, since we are on the subject of the original fairy tale, like, what a lot of people really don't acknowledge about the original fairy tale is that the reason the Beast is cursed is because he turned down a fairy who was practically his guardian? Like,
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sure
oh,
it's
that's a lot more gross.
But you can see the metaphor in that. I mean, he was hurt, he was traumatized, and that's why he's like
yeah,
this.
no, it makes perfect sense when you think think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, but it's like, let's take somebody who made a healthy decision and punish them for it.
Well, I mean,
And
that's
punish
fairies.
everyone in the immediate vicinity,
mean,
depending.
I've seen versions of that where the condition wasn't, as it is in this movie, a loving look, but it was find someone to marry you, hence the continual asking of, will you marry me, Belle? But I think the fairy's logic was, if you're an ugly beast, I'm the only person who will marry you, so you have to acquiesce to my demand.
I
And
don't think
that's I think, both a bug and a feature of the story that I have some issues with, because a lot of the time when I'm reading a Beauty and the Beast story, one of the things that I have a really hard time getting around is how much is the Beast motivated selfishly by bringing Belle into this.
Yeah.
That was actually something that I liked about the 2017 version, because the 2017 Beast, to me, was so uninterested in Belle as a means of breaking the curse. He was so resigned to his fate that it didn't even occur to him, and so the romance just happened because they theoretically had similar interests and stuff. That's not to say that the 2017 remake doesn't have a multitude of issues. It was just something that managed to address an issue that I have in versions where it's like, again, it's going back to, this is an arranged marriage where there's a specific motive on the groom's part
That's fair.
that I'm not fully
Yeah.
comfortable with.
But yeah, the whole idea that this is a traumatized character was actually something, because I've mentioned in the podcast before, Shamila and I did kind of a series of our own fairy tale retellings with like graphics and summaries on Tumblr. I actually added our version of Beauty and the Beast in that. In this version, our Belle seeks out the Beast, actually, trying to kind of get away from shit, which I do kind of want to see more Beauty and the Beast adaptations do in the modern era. I feel like that could be interesting. Again, especially since we're in the golden age of monster film.
Before we started recording, Sam mentioned the Criterion DVD set.
Yeah.
Had a quote from Cocteau.
Do you want me to read the opening paragraph again?
Please do.
The poet Paul Eluard says that to understand my film version of Beauty and the Beast, you must love your dog more than your car. Ordinarily, I would settle for that. However, with so much being written about the film that is entirely false to my intentions, I have decided that I must explain myself just a little. And he goes on for several paragraphs.
Of course he
Truly, I have no idea if I was French there or if I crossed into like German or Dutch.
I think you did Quebecois. I think you ended up in Quebec. I mean, you were
Arguably, that's
Sorry.
better than winding up with a German accent, so...
Yeah, especially considering
My
the French had
apologies to
just
Monsieur
gotten...
Cocteau.
Especially because the French had just gotten free of Nazi occupation the previous year.
They had indeed.
Which is, like, a huge part of why the movie is the way it is. Because, like, they were dealing with resource shortages and
That is true.
blackouts during filming.
I will say, I adore some of the workarounds they found for that and the practicality. I love practical effects and puppets and
Oh
all
my
that,
God,
so
practical
all of that's
effects.
amazing.
Yeah, it was great that Cocteau didn't use any CGI.
No.
But
Okay, but
You do know that a
You're-
Cocteau film with CGI would just go all the way off. Like, he
Oh,
would
God.
go insane.
okay,
To the
but to
moon.
tie it into a
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
Phantom of the a different Beauty and the Beast story, it gave me some vibes of like I was wondering, did Maria Bjornsson like look at this film for some inspirations when she was doing like the black box theater setup of the original Phantom of the Opera? Because a lot of that involved negative spaces, and some of the best scenes in this film also have that big negative space where the only light source is focused on Belle and the Beast, and it's beautiful.
Wouldn't surprise me. And yeah,
So
it is
I'm
appropriate.
a giant costume and practical effects nerd. So this was, just from that perspective alone, this was a lot of fun because I was shown a lot of black and white movies when I was a small, but they've all kind of blended into my head because I was, as mentioned, a small. And so it's been a while since I've seen a film that's old enough that you get to really be like, they had like really different technology that they were working with, and they had really different levels of whatever. And so I was like crazy impressed with how much expression the Beast was able to present in that costume. And because he does a surprising amount of face acting, which is like a subtle glance of the appropriate type gets my heart all aflutter because I'm a dweeb.
Do you guys feel sorry for the people who were playing like the hand candelabras and the living statues?
they have to have been very patient.
I was going
No.
to say, people have been doing living statues for so long, they probably just went and hired a bunch of living statues.
That or Cocteau went to whatever the local acting school was and rated their mime performances and said, "You want to get
course.
some really great mime training?"
Yeah.
According
They're
to
like
IMDb
this forever.
But, we jumped right into talking about the film itself. We didn't really talk too much about, our history with the film. So this was actually recommended to me when I was 16 years old, when I was in late middle school, entirety of high school. I was part of this writer's workshop group with my library. And I just
fun.
gotta give a shout out to Melissa Bobby. She was one of the best mentors a gal could ask for, and she would recommend these kinds of movies to me. I also first saw The Red Shoes because of this, because of her. So, yeah, that's also
Classic.
that's gonna be interesting to talk about someday. But I've always loved this movie. Like we said, the practical effects are just stunning, and again, seeing all the little ways it's influenced different other things that I love, including the Disney version, of course, has been really interesting. And Beauty and the Beast will always have my heart because we'll get into that when we talk about its impact.
I think I first saw this version of the movie in college on Laserdisc in my school's library. I deliberately sought it out. I'd heard of it forever, but I hadn't actually seen it myself. My dad talked about how much he loved seeing it when he was in college. He managed to see it as a double feature with a short, Bambi Meets Godzilla and Night of the Living Dead.
Bambi meets...
That's an interesting
You
combination.
haven't seen Bambi Meets Godzilla?
Well, fuck, I guess we gotta cover
I've
that
never
too someday.
heard of this.
Go on YouTube now, look up Bambi Meets Godzilla. It truly is one of the greatest animated shorts of all time.
I'm sure.
That is all I will say. It's very Monty Python. I'll just do
I would
that.
imagine so.
Yeah, that feels about right from the title.
God, the thumbnail I'm looking at, it's just the Godzilla foot.
Yeah, I basically gave Monty Python the idea for the big foot gag. But anyway, I first saw La Belle Et La Bete 1946 in college. For my web show, Browse Out High, I had been wanting to talk about it for a while. I initially didn't because I thought it wasn't weird enough to talk about on the show. It was too well known. This was a huge hit. This was a huge international hit that informed so much of pop culture, so much of gothic pop culture. It's just been in the background of...
Yeah, but Kyle, it's French.
The mouse.
It is very French, that is
Yeah.
for sure.
The deepest dive I ever did was when I actually pitched the idea to my colleague Tony Goldmark, host of Some Jerk with a Camera and Escape from Walt Disney, the podcast, which I have been on several episodes of, as a co-review comparing and contrasting Cocteau's version with Disney's version, which turned into a musical set in Disneyland. So I might end up repeating a lot of stuff that I said there when talking about this movie, but
Especially since we're encountering people who are befuddled by this.
the thing is, this is one of Cocteau's most accessible films.
Oh,
geez.
Like, compared to Blood of a Poet, this is just
Oh,
a
yeah.
child's matinee.
quite literally,
So,
my letterbox review for this movie is that's the most comprehensive surrealist film I've ever seen. Because one of the first movies I got subjected to in film school was
Next to the Afternoon?
Yeah, that's one of the first films I got introduced to in film school.
Oh, that's a classic, of course.
Yeah, so I was watching this and I'm like, oh, I understand the plot. I understand what going. Characters have motivations. Incredible. We
It's
are
just
off
the
to
right
a great
start.
start.
It's just the right sweet spot of dreamy, but still recognizable.
Yeah.
So,
Again, Maya Deren, also a huge voice in the history of surrealist film, that even if it seems, unapproachable on the surface, it still, influenced so many people, so many directors after her. Christopher Nolan's first short film was basically a rip-off of Messages of the Afternoon.
So as I was watching this in full for the first time, I was like, okay, so is Jean Cocteau to the 1940s what Julie Taymor was to, the 1990s? Because it's that same, I think, sort of
In that they both
bourgeois
had...
weirdness.
Yes. Cocteau was a celebrity. He was more famous for his work in the theater than on film, and during the 30s and 40s, he was mostly known as a playwright. He did do some screenplays for film, but the thing that made him internationally famous was this movie. Blood of a Poet was still more underground.
I definitely remember when I was forced to endure Oberlin College's theater history class, Cocteau did get brought up as a contributor to theater.
You're absolutely right. He started working for, was it the Diaghilev group? Russian ballet in Paris, doing, I think, set design for it. And it was because of his design that the word surrealism first appeared in print in a review of that ballet. Before André Breton wrote the Surrealist Manifesto. There's a whole beef between Breton and Cocteau, which may or may not have been influenced by Breton's own homophobia. It may have also been influenced by Cocteau's kind of annoying right-leaningness. Compared to the communists that he was talking to. But he absolutely was kind of a centrist. He wasn't a collaborator, certainly. He was famous for calling the Nazi occupation the shameful peace, because it forced artists to work with the occupying force. He did try to get one of his Jewish friends out of being deported. I don't think he succeeded. He tried. Later in life, he would be accused of collaborating, which he turned into a movie. His last movie, The Testament of Orpheus, has these long scenes of a woman interrogating him back and forth about his role as a poet, which is actually deliberately mirroring his actual interrogations from post-war France. What did he do during the occupation? I think people thought he was more right-leaning because he said something nice about Arno Breker, who was the official sculptor of the Third Reich. Breker's sculptures were basically nude male figures,
So that's like calling George Lucas a fascist because he quotes Leni Riefenstahl at the end of a
Kind of, yeah. But, Arno Breker and Cocteau do have a lot of aesthetic overlap in the sense that they're both, enamored of that, classical style. Not the actual style of Greek statues, which are brightly colored, but the accepted, literally whitewashed version of history that focused on pure form. And, Arno Breker, basically, if you look at any Nazi on Twitter right now and look at their profile, they might have a photo of Arno Breker's sculpture because his sculptures were the perfect Aryan man.
Ugh.
Maybe Cocteau thought they were cute.
Oh, God, why did you have to say it like that?
Because that's how I justify it in my head. But
Whatever gets you through the day.
I've heard of worse gay disasters.
Oh, absolute gay disaster. I think one of his first statements on when the Nazis occupied Paris was, "Oh no, where will I get my heroin?" That might be apocryphal, but yeah.
Hey, but those were the best ones.
But absolute disaster.
The story about him trying to get one of his Jewish friends out during the occupation, though, that does make me wince even more at his choice to include the moneylender.
Oh my God! Y'all can imagine how I respond to
because
that.
I do not remember that in any version of the fairy tale that I've read, and I was Jean, pourquoi?
Yeah, it's such a brief scene, but it stands out.
Because he's French.
Yep.
And also, anti-Semitism is apparently an international pastime.
Isn't so much of 20th century anti-Semitism, so much of that sprang from, the Dreyfus Affair, which was in France. And, France is a deeply anti-Semitic country, most countries in Europe.
France is both anti-Semitic and in the more modern day, though this is not actually very new. It just looks a little different now. The French are very, for a while the French thought about what kind of Christian you were, but they generally tend to come down to, we're going to call ourselves a secular state, but we're gonna persecute anyone who's not Christian, and the Christians will just hand wave. But once again, I'm sitting there, and one of the boys said moneylender, and I went, uh-oh.
I'm sorry.
And then he comes on screen, and I'm like,
he has a big
could you
Bradley
have
Cooper
been,
fucking
could
nose.
you have been, and the hat, and, the fact that he's cruel specifically, and I'm just sitting there going I knew this was going to happen as soon as they said the word moneylender, but why was this necessary? Because the thing is that the family's fucked.
Yeah.
Without adding to it, right? Because there's all
God
the
damn
deaths
it, I
in
have
the
to give the
cities.
2014 version a point for not having that.
Yeah.
True.
I mean,
very true.
Yes, or just don't give them a negative point because that's not part of the story and they didn't add it.
That is true.
Right? Because, I had thought that Disney's whole we're gonna threaten to lock up her dad for being crazy was as bad as you could get. And then the fact that it gets its own song in the Disney
Broadway
stage
version.
musical version.
I actually know the original Broadway LeFou. His sister was my middle school drama teacher, and when I was
Oh my
doing summer
gosh.
theater of Seussical the musical, he came in to teach us clownery.
Oh,
That's wild.
appropriate. I love that you
Yeah.
can
Raskin is a very nice man.
But
He's a
yeah.
nice man.
I love these little anecdotes. They're so cool. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
I didn't think that you could make it that much worse. But apparently, I was wrong.
It could always go.
I am very sorry, Ilana. And
Yeah,
Oh
I'm
gosh,
sorry.
I don't hold any of y'all personally responsible for any of this shit. And
We didn't direct the movie.
No,
exactly.
but still, I'm sorry to Kyle, didn't you see my time machine? I actually went back in time. Don't remember.
I did not watch it until literally the night before we recorded the podcast, and I watched it with my wife because she and I like to natter about films together, and it was going to help me speed run the process of the navel gazing thinky part that I was going to want to do before I came into the podcast with y'all. And I think I may be the one or one of the only ones in this group that doesn't have an academic film background of some kind.
I only took one French New Wave class, pretty much.
technically the majority, my training's all in theater. I just fake picked up film theory from watching Kyle and a couple of other people.
I was making it up as I went. I was getting a master's degree as I was making the show. And even that was more focused on film production than film theory, so...
Yeah.
But still.
So that makes me I have a literal degree in cinema and media studies.
Yes, it does.
Good for you.
I
Same
have,
here.
I have an English
Bachelor's
degree, but
or
instead of
associate?
studying, I have an English degree, but instead of studying books by crusty old white men, I study movies by crusty old white men. Actually, I went to,
Associates and
actually, I went to school in
bachelors
Canada.
film,
They made a
so.
dedicated effort to at least try to include Indigenous filmmakers.
Oh, that's
good
something.
for them.
Not that I understand any of them, because I feel like I need half an Indigenous history course, but that is a general failing of the education, more so than a knock against the filmmakers.
I've taken many of film history classes, and this filmmaker never came up. So I commend all of you who have this like very well-rounded film history education. I mean, Kyle, you seem to know Jean Cocteau's filmography by heart.
Well, again, I had to do a lot of research for the video that I did with Tony.
Okay, that makes sense.
I will admit, Cocteau is not that big a figure in the grander history of film. He didn't innovate much. Like, even in this film, you see him using a lot of practical effects that had already been, basically perfected decades before, like by Méliès, as old as that. His most groundbreaking work was his 1930 Blood of a Poet. But even then, he went like a full decade and a half before making another movie after that. And he's generally not even primarily known as a filmmaker, but as a poet, as a playwright. This film is more of a curiosity in the greater history of film, but it's such a pretty curiosity, though.
It is very
looks
interesting to turn it
beautiful.
around and look at all the shapes.
I only know about this film because I watched Kyle's video as an impressionable high schooler.
Oh no.
You're young.
All you children watching our videos, it just...
I'm a little baby.
Oh, good lord.
And so it was like sitting on my docket. I think it's in I have a notebook where I try to keep a list of like films I should eventually get around to seeing, but for whatever reason, either because of access or like not tying myself to a chair long enough to watch them, I hadn't gotten around to.
You should get a letterbox then.
I have a
Perfect for that.
letterbox. I follow you on
Excellent.
Letterboxd.
Well, okay.
But it's fine. So like I had to watch this for the podcast, so I like, got it on Canopy, and I was like sitting through it, and I was like, oh yeah, no, I get what's going on. It's a miracle of God, like I was like, is this finally pay off for 4 years of having to sit through the most navel gazy shit I've ever seen in my life? Is this, my film history degree finally working for me? Or is it just because, like I had, such familiarity? And unfortunately, that video does live rent-free in my brain because the minute the beast came on screen, my brain, in Tony's voice, went, Kitty!
There are bloopers of me cracking up every time he said kitty. It was so hard to keep a straight face.
How hard was it to keep up with your persona during that, if I may ask?
It was tough. If I can talk about the video for a second.
Go ahead.
Basically, so much of that script ended up with me taking a side that I would not necessarily take because my persona had to be the pro-Cocteau and Tony had to be the anti-Cocteau. And there are so many moments in the script where I would write something in defense of Cocteau's portrayal of, say, Belle's...
Women be shopping?
Yes. And then just have Tony voice my next thought, which is, what the fuck are you saying? Like,
Yeah, let's talk
Because
about
it is-
stepsisters.
it,
Because
yeah.
here's the thing: within the fairy tale, and also in few other adaptations, it's kind of is necessary that Belle's family kind of sucks, actually, because you know it kind of
Really, I'm just questioning why she's so devoted to her father when he's such a shitty parent.
exactly, and that's kind of a necessary part of the formula if you're going to go in that route. Like, Beauty and the Beast managed to make it work where it really is just her and her... I mean, the Disney version managed to make it work when it's just her and her father, because it's like they're both kind of misfits in this shitty town.
If you lose one of them, it like risks the safety and security of them both, because it's like,
They're all they have.
yeah, well, they're all they have, and like Belle is clearly seen as an outsider. If her father were to suddenly die, the town would abandon her.
Oh, absolutely.
And if the father were left alone and Belle suddenly vanished, you know, when whenever she got married, or if she died or what have, her father would not be taken care of by the town. And this is like pre-revolutionary France, like best pre-ish, post-ish revolutionary France. Who cares? It's the early nebulous early Middle Ages, late
They'd
Middle
be
Ages.
fucked. They'd be fucked, basically.
Somewhere in the Ancien regime.
Yeah, community would have been the only thing that would have saved them.
They don't
in
have
this-
that.
They don't, which they aren't a part of in
yeah.
that version.
I'm kind of reminded of the discourse that has kind of shifted around Pride and Prejudice lately, because a lot of people have now, they side more with Mrs. Bennet now as we've kind of reoriented to recognize that marriage was a financial transaction then. And yes, Belle's sisters are awful in this movie, but there's a reading that they're trying to basically escape
Poverty.
a threatening life of poverty.
Yeah, and
That doesn't
Yeah, except they
justify
have
what
to
they
be
do to
so
Belle.
shitty to Belle about it in the process.
I mean, that's the question.
So
And their
you
brother.
could, you know, twisted your arm and held you in a half Nelson. You could theoretically do a reading of Belle's sisters as fighting their way or trying to save their family in the only way that women theoretically could have at the time, which
Marriage.
is by marrying rich.
and I would love to
and-
see a take
and-
of that.
Specifically going for, like, I think they say, like, he's a duke or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, that implies that he has enough power and enough lands that it would have saved them and their family, including, you know, their father, their sister, and their brother. So, like, you could, like, if you put me in a half Nelson, you could force me to write that essay.
But and that's an interesting point, because I mean, Cinderella's stepsisters have gotten a lot of reevaluation in a lot of
Yeah, I
kind
was
of
going to
twists.
say they're cruel and petty because they're fundamentally not nice or good people, but part of the reason, because Cinderella, usually the reason why it's in the figuration it is that it's the same thing where the family has lost all of their money, and often the head of house, but not always, and so it's the stepmother, which would have been challenging because women and their husband's money, even if their husband is dead, has been very complicated for a lot of European history. And so part of the reason why she wants to marry one of the girls off to the prince so badly in, you know, lots of retellings is because that would save the entire family, because she could take them all with her. The idea that I forget if this is actually how it is in the original French or not. Sam or someone can correct me, but I believe
Is this
after...
about the sisters getting turned into statues?
No, this is about the sisters. One of them cutting off her, one or both
Cinderella.
cutting off their
You're
heels
talking
and
Cinderella.
toes. This is
Yeah.
Cinderella. Yeah, and so they cut off their toes and heels to try to. This is gross. Sorry, everyone. To
it's
fit
okay.
into the
I think
shoe.
We've all
Most of
seen
us
Into the
know
Woods.
Into the
It's
Woods.
fine.
And when they,
Yeah.
well, I would assume, and then they get their eyes pecked out by birds, and I think
Yeah.
that
I
basically
still like the Persian
almost all
version
of that
better, where
comes
their
from
hearts
the French.
explode.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, the karmic punishment for the sisters happens in the Madame Le Prince de Beaumont version too, which is included in the criterion. I know your hearts and the malice they contain. Become two statues, yet keep your reason within the stone that shall imprison you. You will remain
Oh,
at the gate of
yikes.
your sister's palace, and I impose no other punishment on you than to witness her happiness. You can return to your former state only when you recognize your own faults, but I'm very much afraid you will always remain statues. People get over pride, bad temper, greediness, and sloth, but the conversion of a mean and envious heart is practically a miracle. So says the fairy that cursed the beast and now comes back.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
again, that's the fae for
Don't
ya.
fuck with fairies.
Don't.
Just
Do not fuck with the
generally
Fae.
don't.
My overwhelming thought process, at least with that, and I had this thought when I was watching the 46 version, and I sent it to Jazz, is I would be so bad at these, like, only the pure of heart will survive challenges, because I, as many of my friends have pointed out to me, my ideal, like, romantic scenario is a screwball comedy where,
Hey,
like,
you know, no
which
one
is-
can judge the content of your soul, right? Like,
yeah, but it's,
like
it's,
what you like. It's all good.
It's the idea of, like, you know, being enough in sync with somebody that you can trade insults back and forth, as well as, like, you know, 3 layers of double entendre at bare minimum.
And you're both secretly gay if it's a Katharine Hepburn one.
Truly.
Mm-hmm.
Truly.
So you want a much ado about nothing, almost.
Not quite. I could do without having to fake somebody's death.
We don't talk
Oh,
about
yes.
Hero and Claudio, at least not yet. Editor Jasmine here. Of course, we have indeed talked about Hero and Claudio at length. I'd say you should check out our Much Ado About Nothing episode, but statistically speaking, you probably have. It's our most listened to episode. Yay.
I want to scream for a second, if that's all right. Please feel free to join me. About what the ever-loving hell was going on with those costumes.
What about them?
You need to be more
The
specific.
historical... I have no idea when that film is supposed to take place, because the
Okay,
historical
definitely
spread...
early 17th section.
If you look at the spread on the costumes, and you ignore the stuff that's, like, completely historically atypical, and you take the Beast and set him to the side, because part of his costume, like the fake shoulders on that they put on him to make him look huge, were fantastic. No, I love it. I love that shit. That is like one of my favorites.
That looks so
But-
uncomfortable. I just keep
So
thinking.
Oh
better.
god,
So
it
much-
does look so
sweating.
uncomfortable.
So much better dressed than the Disney version, gotta say. But
Yeah, but
I love the
But-
spangles.
I-
I love the spangles on his coat, like unironically.
yeah,
But like.
you are absolutely right. The costumes are very ahistorical. It's
Because all
Yeah.
of the men who were the father's age are dressed like classic elementary school Thanksgiving pageant pilgrims, and
Late
the
16th,
girls,
early 17th century.
and so
Yeah,
but the daughters and the son and the son's dipshit friend.
the LeFou, basically.
No, he's the Gaston,
the son is
and
the
the
No, the
brother's
brother
Oh.
is the LeFou.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Ludovic.
and
Avenant.
Avenant. But so Avenant and Ludovic are wearing detached
The tightest
sleeves
tight.
and tight, and with the dresses that the girls are wearing don't.
think
First of all, the
Ludovic
ruffs
has, like-
don't actually match the rest of the dress, but they're like a good 300 years older than what the adult men are wearing. And then the dresses that Belle gets from we never see it, but it's probably their magical closet in the castle, are just like whatever the costumers decided to throw together with a bunch of pearls all over everything.
Child
And, like,
logic.
I'm just
Child
sitting
logic.
here going like,
No,
Child
no.
logic.
No. Back it up. Okay, so not child logic, but Cocteau was referencing painters more often than actual history.
yeah, well, there's
because
some
his design-
painters that got
his
it right,
design-
and painters that got it wrong. So
His design for the peasants were like taken from Rembrandt, Vermeer, 16th century painters, Dutch Golden Age painters, to get those ruffs. For the Beast Castle and his costumes, he was going for Gustave Doré, 19th century illustrator.
So that's what I'm saying, is that you've got, you can see...
It is deliberately anachronistic.
Well, so I assumed that, like, the logic, quote-unquote, other than let the costumers either have fun or what do we have in the closet already, because that is a heavy motivator when you're trying to do things quick, fast, and cheap, which it sounds like money and
All
access
the
would have
budget
been
went
an
into
issue,
spangles.
basically. But no, the thing is...
All the
in
budget went
Korea-
into keeping the lights on. I mean, as I said,
that's what I was
rolling
thinking.
blackouts during filming.
Yeah.
I watched a bit of the commentary on the Criterion channel. The scene where Belle's father comes across the dead deer that
Yeah.
the beast had gored, they couldn't get a deer because of meat shortages.
Oh, wow.
Oh my god.
They got a dog. They found a dog's corpse and made it up like a deer.
Well, it passed
Super low-
inspection
yeah.
on my TV, but just the thing I wanted to
I
say
know.
is that
Well, that
The
puts
look
the
of
you have to
horror-
love your dog more than your
once,
car thing.
well, if it was already dead, that's not. If it was already dead, that's not.
Yeah.
the same as killing it.
Better
okay?
have been already dead.
But no, so I was gonna say that the one kind of sort of benefit almost once I could get, you know, the costumer part of my brain to shut up was the lack of coherence adds to that kind of otherworldly, fantastical vibe because it's not set any particular place, particular time, particular anything. It's all
any
over the
fairy
place.
tale.
And
Once upon a time.
not counting Disney for a moment, some fairy tales are very dated and others are very not. And I'm talking about original folkloric ones. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about retellings that, modern set or pick a particular time period because they want to. But there's this kind of amorphous once upon a time that Kyle just referenced, and that is very clearly where this version of the fairy tale takes place, which I thought was just a cool side effect of dear God, what's happening in the costume department.
They were going by rule of pretty.
Yes.
If that, like the rule of cool, can carry some damn good mileage.
There's this website I love called Frock Flicks. They're all
Yeah.
about historical accuracy and one of their catchphrases is, I don't care if it's historically accurate, I just want my tits out. So I'm glad that the costumes did not go that far. I mean,
Yeah.
Belle did have some tit swag, but
Not too much.
it could have been worse.
Very light there.
I think for me, God, it must be a pain to get around a costumer's brain, because that couldn't be me. I just everything sort of zones out, and I'm like, hell yeah, we're having a time.
Yeah.
I have to purposefully, if I want anything in my brain to be any form of period accurate, I'm like, all right, I actually have to look up the period. Hold on.
I do love all the black and white and the plays of light and shadows, but part of me wishes I could see what this looked like in color. I think it
Just
must
out
have
of
looked
curiosity?
even more beautiful,
It must have
as
looked,
they were shooting it.
It must have looked like some form of a nightmare as well, because to get that sort of contrast without, part of it is a lot of dramatic
I've seen
lighting.
the Addams Family house.
But
I can't imagine this movie working in color.
Oh
No.
no, you're absolutely right.
Just
2014
is
version.
terrible.
Oh yeah, that's
I'd
the
like to
only
see a
reason.
colorized version. Like to see a
Colorized blasphemy. You are speaking blasphemy, sir.
Madness.
I do think colorized is blasphemy in certain contexts, like It's a Wonderful Life. Like, Prime has the normal version and the black and white version, which is
That's where I
just
saw
stupid.
it.
The reason I was like, oh, this would kind of be cool in color is just because the poster for this movie is in color. And I was like, oh, so that's kind of what they look like in color. I think that'd be interesting. Also, I kept trying to guess what color the mantle was. Anyway. What
Could
they
have
were
been
painting.
red, could have been navy.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, especially because it's a fantasy, I feel like the color would work better than something like, It's a Wonderful Life, which is more grounded for most of the movie.
I mean, interestingly, again, I know we said we were going to avoid talking too much about the 2014 version, but that's part of what initially attracted me to it. And boy, was that a letdown. But yes. Continuing on, circling back to Belle's family, I will say, as somebody with a brother, as a femme-presenting person with a brother, the fact that
Relatable?
Oh, I hope not.
Ludovic being all, okay, listen, I'll hang out with you, but no fucking way am I letting you marry my sister. Boy, does that sound familiar. It's like, it is a consistent thing. You'll see all of these guys who hang out with other dudes who they would not trust around the women they actually care about.
Doesn't that say something about masculinity?
There is a reason
Says
that
the
the
lesbian.
the best friend's brother the best friend's brother, or that trope and every alteration of it exists in the world as a secret romance plot.
I've never been a fan of it. For
Honestly,
that exact
I
reason.
was kind of thrown by that at the start. When you first meet Avenant and he's coming on with oh, even the floor wants to be your mirror. You're so beautiful. And you think okay, so maybe the only conflict here is that Belle wants to stay with her dad and she's just not that into you. And then, nope, we have to go for the attempted assault. And I'm like, I feel like this was just crammed in to make it an easy explanation for why Belle isn't into this guy.
We can't just
Except
have
she
then
tells
Curry.
the beast that she loved
know,
Avenant.
she
And I'm
always
like, where
did.
did that come from?
Yeah.
I will
Right? That
admit,
made no sense.
Oh, no, go
Je ne
ahead.
comprends pas. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Je ne comprends pas.
Cocteau is more interested in ideas than people.
Yeah, which was a running theme in your video, so that does make sense. He wasn't really interested in the plot being coherent, because It does seem like back then people were a lot less likely to question how a fairy tale plot goes. It's just like, oh no, this is what's supposed to be happening.
Here's my reading, because I, as Sam can attest when I was talking about Empire Records, I live in chronic fill in the gaps brain.
Yeah.
Which is a
Same
terrible
here.
place. Which is a terrible place to live.
I mean, I feel like it's a natural thing as a writer, is the thing.
Yeah. So my response to Belle saying, that she was in love with him, is I think she may not have been in love with like the version we meet, but she was in love with some past version of him, because like his whole thing is that it's very clearly like he is familiar enough with the sisters and with the brother that he has been a presence in these people's lives for a minute.
There the whole time, too.
Yeah, so
It's that DW thing of, why don't you go to your own house and stop bothering us?
So my chronic fill-in brain says that he's either like a family friend who, at one point was not always a dick. More like
Oh my god, he's actually in love with Ludovic.
that too. There is that reading as well. So that's not where I was going.
Okay, so
Yeah, we're getting into fan and
Yeah,
movie
so
and not film and movie.
That's where I was.
I'm kidding.
That's where I was getting at. Is just the idea that like there is that reading, and I understand like the idea is more than people think. But again, I live in chronic fill-in space, so I was willing to take that line sort of as is, as much as I was willing to take anything else in this movie as is. If we want to argue the dream logic of not everything is consistent in a dream, you say shit that you wouldn't in real life. You do shit that you wouldn't do in real life.
But it makes perfect sense at the time.
At the time, in the moment,
So-
it makes perfect sense.
maybe I'm
she
just
loved him
an
like
idiot.
a brother.
Maybe I'm just an idiot, but I actually had like legitimate difficulty until figuring out whether Avenant was the brother's friend or another brother until he started making the moves on Belle when she's washing the floor. Because I'm literally going like, okay, cool. So they're shooting arrows outside, and they're like, okay, whatever. And then you come in and they're talking about all of this stuff and whatever. And I'm going like, who is this character in relation to everyone else? Because he behaves the same way towards the sisters that the brother does, the definite brother does, but they haven't said, and he's like in their house and all of this shit, and then he starts making the moves on Belle, and I'm like, what is happening here? Because my wife watches a lot of anime, and
Oh, no.
and then I was like, and then I'm like, oh no, okay, this is fine. So he's the brother's dumb shit best friend who, like everyone in the universe, has a crush on Belle, and
The
then
actress
I
at
was like,
least
okay, this
is
is
very
fine,
pretty.
whatever,
So you
whatever.
buy it?
Oh yeah. She
I
gives a
mean-
really good performance.
As a
does.
woman enjoyer, I'm
She
just
does.
like, yeah.
I will say though that I had to go and remind myself of some dates for things, because the way she especially throws herself around set and just drapes herself, you can't see this, of course, podcast people, I'm sorry, but drapes herself across furniture and then just lays there, is very silent film.
Yeah.
Even though it had been
It's also very
more than
theatrical.
20
And
years.
we're talking about a director who originally started in theater.
Yeah, and so the big acting is both a silent film thing and a theater thing, especially when you've got big theaters and you need to be able to express things if people can see your face particularly well. And like, that's fine, but it was very interesting that the Beast did a lot of this too. And there was a lot of like pacing back and forth in corridors, and then occasionally pausing to dramatically drape oneself across a statue and have an emotion and then keep walking. And it was like that, and I understand that the smoke seemed to be indicative of the usage of magic, but it was inconsistent and very confusing. And then there was that one of the two faces on the mantle, well, not the mantle, but the uprights of the fireplace in the dining room that's like constantly blowing smoke out its nose, and I'm like, that's a fun effect, you guys, but I've completely lost where this symbolism was supposed to go.
I think the smoke was
Maybe
actually
smoke
supposed
just looked pretty.
I think the smoke was actually supposed to be like whenever the Beast killed.
Yep,
Yes, except it also
That was part of the
happens-
prologue.
It also, I mean, that's what I was originally assuming, but it also happens when Belle uses the glove, but not every time she uses the glove. So that one where she hops really back and forth really fast because she goes to
That
the
was
beast
so
house.
funny and so
then
relatable to
I
me.
loved her coming through the wall to
that
get
was
to
so cool.
her dad's place.
That was
so cool. Really neat effect. Like, very neat.
Even the wall was
But-
impressed.
Yeah.
No!
Oh, we needed Grady in here.
Yeah,
Oh,
but to give us the wall's opinion. So that one where she lays down in bed and then she goes to the beast's place, realizes she doesn't have the key, goes back again. Like, it doesn't happen there, but then she takes it off and there's like smoke coming out of it, and like the beast has smoke pouring off of him, you know, when he comes in and he's covered in blood and whatever. And then there was that whole thing where there's a deer and the two of them are walking and like she convinces him not to go after the deer.
Kyle, was that the scene that like made Tony do the Twilight thing, or when did the Twilight thing come into it? Because that was the Twilight-iest moment to me.
Oh, right. Oh, because he wants to eat a deer? Yeah. Twilight might have stolen that from this movie, honestly. The Twilight joke that we had in it was kind of like, it's the whole plot, though. All of Twilight is kind of a riff on the whole Beauty and the Beast trope.
Twilight is more of
but
a
it's
beauty-
done through this Northwestern monster mash.
You know, the funny
So-
thing is, she intentionally
Do
made
not
it a Pride
blame
and
the
Prejudice.
Pacific Northwest for Stephanie Meyer, please.
We
Blame
totally
Utah.
don't.
Sorry.
But you know,
Freaking
the
Mormons.
the funny
True,
thing
true.
She intentionally made it a Pride and Prejudice, and I find that very
Except
interesting.
how?
Except it doesn't work. It doesn't.
I was
going
gonna
to
be like, it's much more of a beauty. It's much more of the beauty and the beastly
agree.
groom than it
I
is
agree.
anything else. Really,
Honestly,
and it's
one could
definitely
even
not
argue-
vampires. So
Okay, see, I could argue Pride and Prejudice is just a Beauty and the Beast, but for cowards who don't want to acknowledge that they're furries.
Yeah, you could absolutely make that argument. I've always felt like the Disney version is kind of a Pride and Prejudice that turns into Romeo and Juliet, but with a happy ending. So, the thing about a lot of monster fucking is inherently both, like, the queerness of seeing yourself in the other, and the inherent eroticism of being loved at your worst.
Yes.
And that lends itself handily to the Beauty and the Beast sort of oeuvre because of the idea that, like, as Jasmine mentioned in our rants to each other, because that is how we take notes, is Beauty does not stop liking him until he stops being a dick. And she may be intrigued by him, she may be terrified of him, but until he stops being a dick, she's not into it. That is one of the things that, like, say what you want about anything else about this beast.
He's pretty much never a dick.
Yeah.
Other than the rose.
establishing whatever is dickish, but
Yeah.
But other than that, like, he's basically just enough of a dick to get the story started.
Yeah.
And then he's kind of
Well,
a few levels below sex pest in the fact that he's going to ask her every night to marry him, knowing what her answer is going to be. But
If
and
he were
keeps
part of our
wandering
friend
into her
group, we'd be
room.
making him do push-ups because he
Oh, he would.
self-deprecates so much.
That's true.
That's why his
Je
shoulders
suis
are
un
so big. That's why his shoulders are so big. He's doing push-ups all the time.
Good for him.
Must have an excellent core as well.
I like how much of a like sub the Beast is in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Like compared to the
Is he a
Disney-
sub or does he hate himself?
I can't-
Or is there
It is
overlap?
entirely
You know?
possible to be both.
There's
Yeah.
there's definitely
exactly.
overlap.
If anything,
That-
being
that-
a sub is kind of a healthy way to cope with the fact that you hate yourself.
I think that Venn diagram is a stack of pancakes.
You know,
There are scenarios where it's not healthy, of course, but it can potentially be a healthy way to deal with it, Ilana, because I see your face.
like if I were the Beast's
No,
like
I'm with
sexual
you.
therapist, I would be like, you can be a sub, but you have to make sure that you're self-caring first. You know.
I'm imagining one of the candelabras doing this for him.
I mean, see,
No, it's
That's
gotta
so
be. It's gotta
so
be
You're fine later.
various faces.
He is so into the wax play, it is very frustrating.
That's just cruel.
You're a nightmare. I love it. I love it.
see, you went the candelabra. Immediately, I read Gillian Anderson's character in Sex Education because anytime there's a sex therapist, it's just Gillian Anderson as is. Like, she's not playing the character in Sex Education. It's just anachronistic Gillian Anderson.
You know what? Sure, that's a crossover.
Oh,
How did we get here?
I mentioned monster
Sex.
fucking and it
We
was
were
all
talking
about
about
divorce.
sex.
Yeah, no, like one thing that definitely does set this version apart from most modern adaptations, because let's face it, most modern adaptations are taking from the Disney version, where it kind of introduces the idea that he is kind of a dick. Because really, even in the fairy tale, other than kind of just constantly asking her to marry him, and of course the whole Rose issue, the whole point isn't that he's a dick. It's Belle's character arc.
He thinks he's a monster.
Yeah.
And she kind of has to teach him that he's not. It makes her a little bit of a proto-manic pixie dream girl, but...
She didn't look at him and said,
I can change him. Someone hurt you. I can change you.
I mean, but that's what she proceeded to do.
I get that.
Emotional labor is a tale as old as time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can fix him. I think is a side effect.
Oh, you're saying her presence encouraged him to change?
I wouldn't go that far
really
in this
even
version.
That much, though. Brian,
I don't think I would go that far in this version. In the Disney version,
well, I think the not hunting
yes.
is supposed to be like a big deal, and the fact
that is
that
true.
I felt that there were a lot of like plot red herrings, or maybe just plot things that got like introduced and then dropped without any satisfying conclusion to them. So like, we still don't actually know why the beast was made a beast in the first place, though it presumably has something to do with that pavilion.
Well, no, he mentions at the end that basically his family didn't believe in magic, and
and so he was
fairies
cursed.
were like
but what the
bad.
hell does that mean in coherency?
you pissed off the local fae, and the local fae decided to say, "Well, fuck you too."
You forgot to send one of them a golden plate and an invitation to a christening, and now your baby's dead.
Yeah, just don't fuck with the fae,
sleeping, just sleeping.
That is.
But there's also
part.
like, there's the whole thing with when Belle first arrives, where he's like, and don't look into my eyes, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, and then it went nowhere. And I think it honestly was him having a Spock moment, where if you don't look at his eyes, you can believe that he's an asshole or a logical, emotionless bastard. But if you look at his eyes, you see his emotions, and he's sad.
Which you do.
Yeah.
Which is true.
She does.
Like,
She does later look into his eyes. Like there is that like great moment where he like laps up water from her hands like a dog, and then he just looks up at her, and he gets this like,
I think
amazing
more
shot of his eyes
accurately
and
with
mask.
It is a
cat,
very
because
good
he's
shot.
a lot more cat-like than dog-like.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's a sweet moment. I do think it's a weirdly sweet moment.
I
Yeah.
saw.
You're not disgusted by me. No, I'm charmed. You know, that's why I thought she didn't want her to look him in the eye, because he was ashamed.
Because
he was ashamed of how.
I saw the "Don't Look Me in the Eye" thing as a Eros and Psyche sort of idea.
Yeah, because Eros
Of
and Psyche
the idea
absolutely has DNA
well, so
in the Beauty and
the
Beast
thing
stories.
with the thing with Eros and Psyche,
Much
just
more about the
a
neighbors.
kind of disagreement sort of thing, not necessarily like a you're wrong, but is just the reason that Eros doesn't want Psyche to look at him is because
Deific.
mythologically speaking, people tend to fall in love with him like that just by looking at him, and he doesn't want that. He legitimately, this is like surprisingly egalitarian for Greek mythology, but he wants her to love him for who he is if she ever does, not just because she happens to be married to the deity associated with romantic love. And she does fall in love with him the moment that she sees him, when she brings the lamp before it drops the 3 drops of oil on his arm and he wakes
The
up.
wax
and she
decided that
immediately
he was
falls in
so
love with him.
fucking cute that that the wax had to join the party. As my internet boss put it, or something like that.
I theoretically have a different take on why he has the "don't look at me" thing. That's I believe text supported by his big info dump exposition at the end. Because he says that the curse had to be broken by a loving look, right?
Yeah,
so
true.
I think what it was is he didn't want Belle looking into his eyes with disgust, because that was going to
seal his fate.
I think he feared that would somehow make the curse worse.
That also just
that's what's
sucked
cooking
to
in my brain.
experience.
Oh yeah,
But-
yeah,
True.
Emotionally, who wants to deal with that?
Not
I
me.
already hate myself. Please.
I don't need your help, thank you.
Well, there is that moment when Belle returns home and she says there's a sadness in his eyes, and maybe the beast knew that about himself because
It's all
it's
about
established.
not wanting to be in front of being vulnerable in front of people.
Yeah.
The horror of being known.
It's
And
the
it is
horror
kind of
being
established.
perceived.
Yeah, it is kind of established that he's at least somewhat emotionally intelligent. There's that interaction between Belle and Beast where he says, and I was going to say it as my intro, but he says, besides my hideousness or something like that, I'm not quick-witted.
And she says you're quick enough to recognize it.
Exactly. So
True wisdom is
I thought that was so cute.
yes.
So cute.
They really do have their moments where it's like, okay, I can at least kind of buy the ending.
Yeah.
It is kind of a...
I've seen worse.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very chaste relationship. I could be misremembering, maybe like I blinked, but I don't think I even remember a kiss happening.
Nope, there is not
Nope.
one.
There is not.
Not even when
not-
they're in human when he's in human form.
Which
he
I'm sure
clutches
some
her
of the
to his
ace
bosom,
kiddos are
but no
rejoicing.
kissing.
Yeah.
They do fly at the end.
Yes,
Yeah.
they do fly.
Exactly.
Oh, that
But-
drove me
but there's-
crazy. The way
they
they blew her
fly
skirts
now.
up like that drove me
There's no
nuts.
plausible
Flying.
deniability, but
I mean, they definitely did not have the budget to lift them up on a crane, so...
They literally just jumped down and then reversed it.
Well, that's how they got into
Cocteau
the
loves reversing film.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh,
He
it worked
loves that
so
effect.
well though. Like
very well.
They
The
probably
thing
could
with
have
the-
avoided the skirt thing if they'd just put, like, weights in the dress.
that moment where he opens his palm and then all of these pearls and gems collect into it and it becomes that
tit swag.
it's not really a necklace but the decoration that they then use
Tit
to
swag.
prove the magic is real later on. But I'm sitting there going, I know exactly how they filmed this and it doesn't make it any less awesome looking.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes.
Wait, how did they film that?
Yeah, please.
So what
Besides
they would
obviously
have
reverse.
done, they would have filled his hand with a pile of loose fake pearls and little gems and whatever and stuff and had him twist his hand to drop it so that they would scatter everywhere. Then they take that section, roll it backwards so it looks like everything's coming together into his hand. And then they would have switched to an actual physical piece of jewelry when he drops it onto the vanity. And then that would have played going in the correct direction so that he goes from having loose items in his hand to having the whole beaded thing. And that is, people who still do practical effects will still do that kind of thing because it just works. If you cut it correctly, it works
It's
so
so
well.
cool.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the smoke as a stand-in for the magic. I
Yeah.
think more than the smoke, it's reversing film that Cocteau really loves as a special effect.
Yeah.
Like even in later films, his Orpheus, also starring Jean Marais, he had him enter the underworld through a mirror, and he filmed that by having him put on magical gloves, magical rubber gloves.
He loves
He
which
likes magic gloves.
by taking off. Well, he filmed him taking off the rubber gloves, then playing that in reverse, so it looks like the gloves just snap onto his hands.
Yeah.
And then he filmed the actor taking his hands out of a pool of mercury, and then playing that backwards, so as if he's walking through the mirror. Hands
Actual
first.
mercury?
We do not,
Well, that's
we do
why-
not play with mercury.
That's
people.
why he has the gloves. That's
Well,
why
that's
he
good
needs
at
the magic
least.
gloves.
It's to protect him from
And work the safety
poisonous
precaution into the plot itself.
I
It's fine.
love it.
Okay, good.
I love it. OSHA would be
Damn.
proud.
This movie is
Jean.
sort of OSHA.
Jean.
Johnny.
Monsieur
Johnny Cox.
Monsieur
Oh boy.
You do realize if you had said that earlier in the podcast, that would have just been what we called him for the entirety of the podcast.
I know. I wanted to save it.
Thank you for saving it.
It's delightful, one way
Yes.
or the other.
Besides the practical effects, I think the thing I was most impressed by was all of the mirror shot. Because like that
They're
can
all fake.
I know
They have
they're
to
all
all be fake.
well, I don't know. It's just I think the one that most sticks in my mind is the one where the sister is looking in the mirror and you can see a little bit of her head, but in the mirror it's a monkey.
Yeah. I'm just
And I'm like,
referring.
Oh, the
She
monkey.
says that she wants a monkey.
Well,
Earlier in the movie.
I mean, so the one
Yep.
that I'm referring to with the they're fake, it's gotta be fake, is that the one when Belle is laying down in her bed and then she's got the mirror because the sister gave it to her, whatever, and then she asks to see the beast, and then she reaches out to touch the mirror and it turns back to her face, and you can see her fingers smear the glass, but her hand isn't reflected over her face.
Huh.
That said, the first time she uses the magic mirror and she sees her father and it kind of like she reaches into it and it kind of disappears, I'm not 100%. They must have run between the frame of like her looking into the mirror and then done something tricksy with
I thought it
with
might have been
editing.
like a Pepper's Ghost kind of thing.
I don't know, but it was good and I liked it.
I liked it too. I'm now thinking about the magical accoutrement and the utter waste of the key. Like, talk about a Chekhov's gun that was not fired. I get its purpose symbolically of, like,
Trust.
entrusting your beloved with all of these things that will grant her security, even if she should reject you. But then, this kind of reminds me of when we were talking about, like, the Persian Cinderella jazz, and Satara just telling the sisters about her magic little pot.
Don't do
And
that.
why would you do that? Like,
Yeah.
why would
It's
you tell
about-
your sisters about the magic key?
Well,
It's
and why
technically
would you
she
leave the
doesn't.
key
She
out?
tells her brother and Avenant, and then they proceed to plot with the sisters. She
Yes.
actually has a modicum of sense. It's just she doesn't realize, I guess,
Yeah, but then
quite
she
how
also-
desperate her brother is.
But then she also falls for the sisters crying and like,
I
oh,
can't
Belle,
believe-
don't go.
See,
I will say I loved the one running the unpeeled onion over the other one's cheekbones, going like, this is gonna accomplish something.
I see it as the continuation of the fairy tale archetype of the inherent belief of good.
Yeah.
And
Evil will always triumph because good is dumb.
Oh.
Basically.
So speaks the poet, yes.
yeah, it's the twisted notion, again, why I would fail all these pure of heart tests is because I'm, not an idiot. And it's the inherent belief that Belle believes that the world can still be good, even though she has seen evidence to the contrary, that, at least her brother would not be as much of a self-absorbed prickhead as to covet this sort of thing.
And in fairness, he's been much nicer to her than her sisters have. So the
That
very
is true.
That's also
But he still
recurring.
keeps bringing his dipshit friend over.
But that also happens because they don't have a lot of screen time together.
You can't convince me they're not gay.
Well, I mean, we'll eventually
Well,
get into the LeFou and Gaston of it all, but so getting into
The heist. It's an entire freaking heist.
A heist that leads to karmic punishment, or does it?
First we've
Let's
got to
discuss.
steal the key from Belle. Then we got to figure out how to get there. Then we got to scale up on top of the
Oh
roof
my
because
God.
we decided that the key is too dangerous.
All it was
Danny Ocean would be appalled
All it was missing
at the
was
lack
somebody
of
coming-
planning here.
All it was missing was somebody coming in with a map of the manor and spreading it out dramatically onto the table. Is it
Yes.
bad?
I
wanna
do
see
have
that
questions
now?
about
Is
the
it bad?
I do have questions about the blueprint of the castle.
There's no coherency to the structure of the castle. Don't worry about
Dream
it.
logic.
But it is kind of a dream space, yeah.
Exactly.
Like, it's...
So it doesn't have to
Yeah.
have consistent internal dimensions and shit. It just has to have spaces for people to emote in. I'm
Where's
sorry.
my emotion palace?
I want an emotion palace. Fuck the mind palace. Give me an emotion palace.
I would just lock everything up and leave it over to the side, but that's what chronic depression does to a person. So,
I'm gonna put it in a box and then I'm
Okay,
gonna
we'll
ship
get you
that
a
box to
Diana
somebody
statue to
else.
stand over all of that.
here's my question, and Kyle, you may actually know the answer to this because of your research. Why Diana?
The Hunt Association, I assume.
And it was originally going to
And
be more based off of Cernados,
presumably,
right?
but the thing is that, like, just if we're talking about fairies, why are we mixing Greek mythology in here? Or we just throw it all up in the air and grab whatever looks appealing?
I say it again. Jean Cocteau, 1940s Julie Taymor.
Because why the hell not? He needed a statue of someone with an bow and arrow. I guess Diana makes the most sense. Isn't there that one myth where someone spied on her bathing and she
Yeah,
turned that man into a
Actaeon.
deer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the
Yeah,
only
and then
thing
he's
people
killed by
agree
his
on is
own
that he
dogs.
was devoured by his own hounds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's hunted and devoured by his own hounds. Okay, so Diana gets caught bathing a lot, actually, and she punishes the guys that catch her in more and more interesting ways, which is pretty funny. But it almost feels like a kink too sometimes.
I mean, it's the Greek gods. So
Okay, but
I
now
mean-
I'm just imagining Cabriole the puppy coming in and like nibbling
Yeah, well-
on Avenant Beast's fingers.
Okay, so I was having fun spotting the living statues versus the non-living statues and going, when is that one going to move? And then when it inevitably did, I would sit there and go like the, little raccoon hands, because I was just having too much fun with it, because
You're adorable.
I love that stuff. Like I'm such a contradiction, right? Because normally I do not watch movies that don't have spaceships, superheroes, or dragons in them, is the standing joke. And I don't watch them in movie theaters even before COVID because of various brain gunk. And so, like, that, but then at the same time, like, I love practical effects. I'm just a bundle of contradictions. And so one of the fun things about doing this podcast is it's making me watch movies that are like, I would not go near this normally. We'll see how far I'm willing to stretch, though.
I appreciate your sacrifice.
Well, but it's Beauty and the Beast, and I'm a big, folklore person.
Anyway,
just
being
a folklore buff, this one was an easier one to sell.
That's fair. But yeah, so let's talk about those karmic punishments. We've already kind of touched upon the statues for the sisters. Obviously, Avenant turning into a beast himself before he dies is a little on the nose, but it works for me.
Considering that they do the swap at the exacts, it's intercut, even if I recall correctly. It's kind of like, what's happening here? And like, he doesn't have the long hair anymore, but what is happening? So...
See, this is why I thought it was a middle finger to Brecht.
Okay.
Does Avenant Beast die? Because he's like frozen, but I don't...
Yeah, he
He
does.
He gets
shot
shot
by
in the
an
back
arrow.
by the arrow, and he's
Yes, but it's a
laying
magic
dead
arrow that
among
turns
the-
him into a beast. So
And then
I'm
he
like,
dies.
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
I thought that going into the pavilion is what turned him into a beast, and then he's shot in the back almost immediately
No,
after,
no.
and then he kind of lands and is sort of draped, broken
Oh, no,
doll-like.
No, he's
among the
he's being
gods.
lowered down. He's being lowered down by Ludovic through the window. The statue of Diana gets him in the back.
Yeah.
There's a close-up of his face with a very carefully animated dissolve into his face covered in makeup.
Yeah.
The soundtrack cries.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Oh!
The soundtrack.
And then cut back to Belle jumping back saying, "Où est la bête? Where's the beast?" And then Prince Charming, beast as a human now, does this reverse film fall, magically gets up and says, "It's me," and then
That
info
one
dumps.
was not so smooth, because he looks like he's going straight from lying down to standing, and he just kind of
It was like
pop.
like he
It's like,
bounced
oh,
on a
we're Jack in the
trampoline.
Box now. This is fun.
I have a question for
Beast in
everyone.
the box. Yes.
Did that moment remind anyone of David Bowie in Labyrinth?
Yes,
When he's coming
absolutely.
out-
Oh, absolutely! Now that you said
Yes.
it.
I feel
It
like
did.
Labyrinth definitely took
Speaking
a little.
But
of
I
a
also-
film, speaking
it
of
also
a
felt like it
film
needed
that
some
also
Chumbawamba.
utilizes rolling the film backwards, and also
And
a
having
lot of other
hands,
practical.
disembodied hands sticking
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, they're a lot
I've
more
seen
gropey
some
though.
Beauty and the Beast Labyrinth fan fiction.
Totally believe that the arrow in the back, plus the transformation into the beast, plus the fall, would easily kill Avenant.
Yeah.
So.
Honestly, I get that they wouldn't
He
have had the
looks
budget for
really
it, but
dead.
the way he falls, you would think the arrow would like poke out of his chest.
Well, yeah.
Yes, but
That's a practical effect they could not afford.
No.
yeah, that won't cost
Right.
too much.
And also, it's not very poetic. It's just, I don't know, gory.
Yeah.
Jean Cocteau's not Sam Raimi, you know?
It's
Oh,
just the
God,
fact
no.
that he turns it into
Jean
a beast.
Cocteau's Spider-Man.
No.
He turns into
Please,
a
can we
beast
not?
and then dies. So it's like, what
Yeah,
was the
well.
point of turning into a beast?
Marie Jeanne, look upon my
The
face.
visuals. The visual parallel, I would assume, to give you a
another
serious
cool
answer, Brian.
editing
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a cool editing trick, but also because basically the whole reason Avenant is there is to be a foil for the beast. So how perfect is it for the person who was
Yeah.
ugly on the inside to become quote unquote ugly on the outside? Because let's be real, it's actually a very cool
Well,
design.
that's
I wouldn't
a
necessarily call it
point.
ugly, but go
I
ahead.
mean, that is a point that they make throughout,
Yeah.
like that whole ending there about
Exactly.
like
It's
you
like,
know
you weren't
beauty
so
on the
bad.
inside versus beauty on the outside,
exactly,
and
that's the whole idea.
about Belle is apparently the only one who's got both in like the universe or something.
in the
I don't
story.
know, but nah. Yeah.
She does also say that she's a little disappointed with his final form. Not
I
just that he looks
cracked
like...
my shit up over that.
But then again, that's kind of a problem with the story itself,
Yeah.
especially when it's told visually, because you spend all this time getting to know the beast and know
Yes,
how he
the
looked.
monster
And then,
fucking!
Yeah.
and then he turns into, you know, like, fucking
Just
30 pound
some
Junior or
guy.
something like that.
Okay, so I will.
And then who the hell is this guy?
I will.
And you're expected to fall in love with this guy.
counter argument, and Jazz, you can cut this if you don't feel it's appropriate. I fell more in love with my wife when she realized she was trans and told me so, like romantically and physically. If you look at photos of her from pre-transition when she was still doing boy mode versus what she looks like now, you'd know they were related. You might think they were cousins or even siblings, but she does not look like she did when she was still in passing boy mode. And I'm not comparing that to changing from a beast to a person, obviously,
I mean,
or a human-shaped person. But like, for some people's brains, appearance matters a lot less than other people do, and maybe some of that is just because of my particular sexuality. And but I had a panic attack about being more attracted to her, but just by thinking of her as a woman. Seriously, and she had to flick me upside the head and say, "Calm the fuck down, you're fine."
The way I describe my bisexuality to people is the way that I am attracted to men is different than the way I am attracted to women, and the way I am attracted to non-binary people is different than the way I am attracted to any and all of the above. And that difference does play into how I perceive them and how I interact with them, and how theoretically, if I were in a relationship, how that would entertain. So I totally get the idea of appearance mattering to something to that level of like dichotomy, so to speak, for lack of a better word.
I really think part of it is just that she was finally able to really be herself. And if we connect it back to the whole issue with Beauty and the Beast, it's kind of, at least in terms of this version of the story, he is back to the kind of mode he's comfortable with, because clearly he was very miserable as the Beast.
Yeah, so he definitely was not a beast from babyhood. He definitely got to be a human for a while first. Addie and I were joking that a lot of, not this specific one, it applies to the Disney one, it doesn't actually apply to this one because of what he tells us why he was turned into a beast in the first place, is that so many fairy tales are missing some number of parents, with or without the inclusion of evil step-parents, boo, stereotype, rar. But so many of these things would have been solved like that if there had just been a responsible adult around. And while it does not apply, again, to this version, it definitely applies to the Disney one, because the stupid thing that he does with sending away the person, the ugly hag that's offering him a rose in exchange for just stay the night, if there had been an adult there that said, no, come on in, don't mind him, he's a little silly, none of this would have happened.
I mean,
but then again, that's also
the idea that he was in fact 10 years old when it all started, sure.
Yeah, but even if he's a
nitpicking.
Young man, the way he's portrayed in The Glass, in the opening of the film, in the stained glass, he looks like a young man. So he was probably, 18, 19 years old? And so therefore
And
not
who
fully
isn't an
cooked
idiot,
yet?
then?
I mean,
Who isn't an
no
idiot,
one's
then?
fully cooked yet. I count fully cooked at 25, because that's when your parietal lobe settles down. But it works for medicine, it works for me. But this is one of those stories where he did have parents, and they made it worse, which is wild. And then, Belle being treated like a servant by her own family, including her father, who professes to love her the most, and it's like, that's a thing.
Insert joke half Nelson held paper about the sins of the father.
Oh,
and
bad.
the generational trauma of it all. Again,
I don't know if I
pay me
see
to
it
write-
in this one specifically,
You
but I
can't-
can definitely see it in others.
Yeah, you can't write me to write that. You can't pay me to write that paper. But if you put me in a half Nelson and told me I had to,
I mean, if it means writing a paper and you're going to pay me for it, and it's an opinion of a fairy tale I disagree with, I'm on it. Who cares?
If we go all the way back to what you were talking about with falling more in love with your wife as she, had her egg cracked and realized who she really was, I think that there's a big vein that has not fully been tapped at this point with Beauty and the Beast as a story for body and gender dysmorphia. Part of me thinks it would have to be really carefully done,
Obviously.
but I think there could be a really interesting version where the Beast is trans, and when the spell is broken, they transition to the person they are meant to be.
Something
it would have
that
to
has
be really
so
carefully done
carefully
by,
done, and probably not
by a
for
trans
cis-ets.
author.
No.
But
Here's one main issue that may arise from that is just that essentially what the Beauty and the Beast story is about is outwardly
Ugliness.
love. Well, that, but also like outwardly love, giving or receiving outwardly love, and trans identity. It has more to do with
I cannot contain to one hand the number of relationships that I know that fell apart when one member came out as trans and the sexuality thing didn't click anymore, and they didn't like each other enough as friends to stay married. And I've seen it go really badly. So I just, on that
like
one,
I said,
but
it would have to be really carefully done. But the reason why that vein comes to me is because, for me, I grew up with Beauty and the Beast. To me, before I got all intellectual about it, was a story about finding somebody who sees the real you and loves you for that.
Exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
why the dysmorphia.
Seeing the affection and love in the other, which is why, again, fucking of it all.
And really, beauty.
Yeah,
is
and also how
too.
timeless it is.
Yeah.
Like, this is a story. If you look at fairy tales and how much they twist and turn and change from their original versions, Beauty and the Beast specifically, the girl goes to replace her father as what she thinks is going to be prisoner of the beast, turns out to be a guest, and her love will save him, and eventually it does. That simple thing has held together so tightly for so long, and even some of the smaller details largely get kept throughout, which is uncommon when you're looking at retellings. That's something that Jasmine et al., I'm sure you have already, discovered as you've been working your way through with the fairy tale ones anyway, is that, like, fairy tales change a lot. And not just the bowdlerization of taking out all of the gore that a lot of fairy tales have in their original versions, but, like, people love telling Beauty and the Beast remarkably, I'm going to say straight as in direct the same way, not straight as in the other one, whereas people love twisting The Little Mermaid. They love twisting Cinderella. They love twisting Alice in Wonderland, which is not a fairy tale, but I'm going to count it for a second. They love twisting all of these fairy tales into what is like the weird thing that I can do to it, whereas Beauty and the Beast, at least in my experience, tends to stay relatively straightforward, and it's the details that tell them apart.
Yep.
And those details can get hella fucking moneylender weird.
We have delved into it. What is it about Beauty and the Beast that endures? And Kyle, if you'll forgive me, I do need to quote you again. Like, what you said in the video has stuck in my brain pretty much ever since I first saw it almost a decade ago now. Oh, God.
What? No.
Kyle's going like checking his upload dates.
It is not.
Almost. If it came out in 2014, it turns 10 next year.
Oh God.
I would like to file a bug report. Because that
With
cannot
the
be accurate.
universe. Where did the last 5 years go?
You cannot file a bug report with the process of time. Trust me, I've tried.
We wish you could. But anyway,
How hard, though? You underestimate my stubbornness.
I don't.
But yeah, the reason Beauty and the Beast gets told as often as it does is because as a metaphor for all the ways that a relationship can go wrong and how they can be fixed is just so malleable and adaptable that you can see like shades of it in so many stories, in so many fictional relationships.
absolutely.
That's-
And what you said
I already
about
gave
how
my
it-
2 cents on this topic.
Yeah,
so.
you did. But about how it teaches children empathy, how to love the flawed, especially hit me because while I did make the little joke about how I try to model myself off of Belle, for several reasons, deep down I've probably felt more like the Beast in my life, to be honest. Like, I have spent most of my life feeling unlovable, to be honest.
Yay,
And-
And
othering.
that's also a universal experience.
Othering
I mean-
is the best, right?
Yeah, it's
So many, it's a universal experience, I think, to feel like you're ugly and an outsider and a monster, as the same way that it's a universal experience to fall for someone despite everyone else in society treating them like a monster.
Yeah.
And
I guess in a way I'm still waiting for my own Belle.
I think for me it's a case of like I mentioned at the very, very beginning of this, back eons ago, is that it's one of those structures that you can slap anything into, like little like pegs into holes, and get some sort of fun experience out of. And, you know, from like a retelling standpoint, you get, you know, it's a very bare bones structure. You can do anything in the details and have a lot of fun. If you
It's
want
not even
to
pegs into holes. It's like jelly. You just drop your figurines into jelly and then mold the jelly around them.
Yeah.
And let it calcify.
Yeah, and
Or not jelly, putty.
if you want to do the fan fiction route of, you know, hucking everybody in and seeing what sticks, you don't have to do a lot of character assassination, which is always the flaw when you do any form of AU. And because someone's always got to be the bad guy. If you don't have a readily available want guy, then you're screwed. But unless you want to make somebody up. But the other thing is that it's also, you can think about it too hard like we have, and think too hard about the magic of it all, or the rules of it, for lack of a better word.
All
Or
of the
you
people
can-
that bring up Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, you could think too hard about it, or you can lean into just the, okay, we're doing this, let's vibe with some people and a space. And I think all good stories, to some extent, should be able to... There is a place for structured 3 acts and, like, boom, bing, bang, boom. But I also do deeply love let's go vibe with some characters in a space. And I think Beauty and the Beast lends itself well to let's vibe with some characters in a space stories.
Yeah, I like that.
And if you need to stop vibing and have things happen, there is a pseudo 3-act structure you can lean back on to structure your vibe in a space.
Very convenient.
Yeah.
I think it's probably easier to talk about why this story endures versus like The Great Gatsby, because this one clearly has a message, like a clear message. I think it's 2 things. One, I think we all want to be loved for who we are on the inside. It doesn't matter if we're super confident or we're as self-deprecating as the Beast is in this movie. Like, we all want to be loved for our personality. And I think at the same time, we also want to learn how to at least understand how to love someone else based on who they are and not who they are on the outside. And as history has shown, people often are judged in society by how they look on the outside for so many tiny little things. But I think deep down we all want to be as empathetic as Belle is in the story. The second reason, completely not deep at all, is I think part of what people's favorite part of the story is, and I think honestly the one that probably changes the most between different versions, is what the enchanted castle looks like in the story.
We're all just hunting for real estate.
Fantasy real estate.
Some Barbie's dream houses are giant Gothic castles in the European
Encrusted in
countryside.
gargoyles in the middle of the woods.
Exactly.
And possibly
Like,
with a
who
giant
doesn't-
library.
Like, who doesn't want not just a castle, but like a castle where like all of your like household appliances basically work for themselves? You know, they pour your wine. They like.
Self-cleaning.
You don't even need to clap on, clap off the lights. They just, you know, you walk in the room, they turn on.
I will add that I think that one of the things that's fascinating about Beauty and the Beast is that it has gone through one major change over time, which is something that we touched on a while back. And Beauty and the Beast, the idea of that one being a story of, you know, you're going to be married off to somebody that you're not going to have any say. And it may be terrible, but make the best of it, isn't what anybody really thinks of when they look at creating modern retellings. It's only barely present in this one, and this one's quite old, comparatively speaking, in the history of the creation of, you know, visual media, and you barely get that vibe from it. And it turns a lot more into this idea of understanding core of someone, not being misled by the externals, whether they are beautiful externals or whether they are ugly and monstrous, quote unquote, is reaching that core of another person and saying, that is what I love. And being willing to say it, because like Belle saying that she loves the Beast is kind of key to the vast majority of retellings and adaptations of this story. And that is opening yourself up to a level of honesty that can be hard. And so I think that it's really cool that like the one change the story really went through that was like a big pivot is positive. And it shows also changing understandings and usages of marriage, especially for common people.
I think we can definitely like credit Cocteau. I think it's noteworthy that when this queer man got his hands on it, it started changing more into a story about personal desire than about accepting your role within the status quo. So am I saying that Jean Cocteau opened the door for monster fuckers to have a more widely accepted way to engage with it? Yes, I am, because Beauty and the Beast is very much many people's first monster fucker because it's culturally acceptable. Because, oh, no, see, it's fine, he's not a monster anymore, so it's okay if they fuck now.
Yeah, so it's either Beauty and the Beast or Zootopia, depending on whether you're a millennial or a zennial. Oh gosh, I'm terrible. I mean, okay, to be fair...
Jean Cocteau, Boomer Furry.
Yay.
Especially since
And with that, do we have any final thoughts?
Let's wrap this puppy up. Final thoughts?
Bring back practical effects.
Yes.
Oh gosh, yes. That is definitely a valid final thought.
Pay the actors and the writers and the crew, obviously, but
Cut the CGI
you don't need
budget.
bajillion dollars of budget. Just work with your hands. Make it tangible.
Play the film backwards.
Yes.
Play the film backwards.
Yes.
Shoot in a country that was occupied by Nazis for 5 years.
Wait, all the films are already being made in California.
I will only say
That's a good final line.
parts of California, and also we have a higher concentration up here in the Pacific Northwest than they do in California. They have to bust them in.
No, just as someone who's only seen like the 1991 Disney movie and like clips from the 2017 version, and I've never read the original text. I don't know, I was kind of surprised by how much overlap there was with the Disney movie, and obviously that's because they took a lot of inspiration from it.
If you were in the mood for a little decorative surrealism, this is not a bad choice. And yeah, seeing kind of its influence on not just Beauty and the Beast stories, but also just pop culture in general is actually really fascinating.
If you want an explanation for all of those 80s curtain music videos.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But just generally,
Hey, curtain music videos are cheap to make, man. No insult there.
No, but generally, I think that this movie does capture the haunting aspect of the story, while also being like the romantic love story that, of course, that it is. And yeah, the force is with it.
Wrong podcast, but yes.
Yes. All right. Who's got stuff to plug?
Since I do not know when this is going to air, I don't know precisely what to plug, but Worlds Elsewhere
that's true,
Theater
actually, I did
Company,
think of that.
of which I am a co-founder, Kyle is a co-founder, and I am the current artistic director. Always check our website and our socials. The website is worlds-elsewhere.com, and you can find our social media accounts from the website to keep an eye on what we will be doing.
Editor Jasmine here. It was around this point where I realized, oh wait, we should probably wait for the plugs until after this. And the thing is, the plugs are attached to the ending of the next part of this double feature, so stay tuned for that. I'll still be posting everybody's info in the show notes, of course. As for me, as always, you can find me on Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok at Faye Riviera. And you can also follow the show on Twitter at IER Podcast. Please also consider supporting this show either financially through our Patreon, Ko-Fi, or the Support the Show link in the show notes, or simply spread the word about the podcast and leave us reviews and ratings to help us reach the next chapter of our story. Like I said, next full episode is going to finally be our review of the 2014 remake of this very film. Thank you for listening, and to paraphrase the video that helped inspire this episode, stories gain power in each retelling. The queen and the fairy, her sister, were equally attentive to Beauty, her husband, the queen, his mother, the old man, and all his family, so that there never was known people who lived so long. The queen, mother of the prince, caused this marvelous history to be recorded in the archives of her kingdom and in those of the Happy Island, that it might be handed down to posterity. They also decimated copies of it throughout the universe, so that the world at large might never cease to talk of the wonderful adventures of Beauty and the Beast.